Hey, welcome back to Max Dave Horsemanship again. And in a recent video that I did, I had somebody making a comment about they don't have great facilities to work in. They can't do what I did with one. They were referring to a video from a few years back where I had a nice indoor arena to work in. And I totally understand that, and that's why I've often, I've refrained from as much as possible doing any videos, even in a round pen, because most of you don't have one. A lot of you don't even have access to one. So I like to keep things as simple as possible and show you what you can do with virtually nothing. And in many of my recent videos, that's exactly what I've been doing because I moved to a facility. Actually, I just moved again, but I moved to a facility where next to nothing and lots of other horses around and things like that. And there are things to be concerned about, but that doesn't mean it stops you. It didn't stop me. And I am going to, this is just an intro to another video. There's a lot of snow in that one. Don't get excited. That's not recent. It's a very old video done a long time ago, and I just never got around to uploading it. I'm going to put a link, or I'm going to add it to this one now, and show you what you can do with next to nothing, and how you can set up a little area to work with your horse in if you have other horses around. And depending on how you go about it, it might not cost you any more than the price of a lead rope, that type of thing. If you want to get real fancy, it might cost you a little more, but it's doable. It's always doable. There's always a way you can do things. You can always create the facilities you need using what you have available and what you can afford. You know, I've said before, you don't have to go broke just because you got a horse. You can be smart, use your head, improvise, use what you have at your disposal. And that's what this next video is about. It's about creating a place to work with your horse because it's important, if at all possible. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, but you want to have an area where your horse is segregated from the other horses, where you don't have to be watching over your shoulder or over the back of the horse you're working with, which would be very difficult for some of you if you're a little shorter. You can't even see over the horse, so you don't know what's sneaking up on the other side, because it can not only be a bit of a problem if you don't have your horse isolated, but it can also be downright dangerous working with your horse around other horses. I've gotten good enough at it that on occasion I can do it. I can get away with it, depending on the horses. I know what to watch for and how to keep myself safe. I can do that, but I don't like to. It's not good. It's not even my first choice by any means, and I don't encourage anybody else to do that either. Said in another video I did not long ago, actually I don't think I've uploaded that one yet, don't do what I do. Okay, don't use me as an example, because I know some of the horses and I know what I'm doing. I can get away with a lot of stuff that I would never ever want to see anybody else doing, because it could be downright dangerous. And even for me, if things were to go bad, it could become dangerous very quickly. So I just want to show you now, this next little segment coming up, what you can do to help create a safe place for your horse. Watch and enjoy. Well, welcome back. This is a video I should have done a long time ago before it started snowing, and I have to do it in the snow. But, well, you can make an excuse or you can make a way. Maybe I made too many excuses and didn't get it done before, but we're not making any excuses today. We're just going to go ahead and do it. Now, I talked about how you can improvise a space to work in, or how you can improve spaces to work in, things like that. And I also talked about how square corners were a bad thing for horses, particularly fairly inexperienced horses. They get stuck in the corner, not physically but emotionally. They'll get into a corner, and it can be a huge safety issue too, because in order to drive the horse out of the corner back to where you can work with it, this is assuming you don't have it on a lead, you may actually have to get close enough behind that horse that, well, it could be dangerous. You could get kicked if the horse is already that worried that it's stuck in a corner. Getting that close to it to drive it out could be a safety issue. And
Now, the suggestions I'm going to make here are going to be very dependent on whether or not you own your own property and depending on what the property owner is willing to allow you to do. Now, this isn't my property either, so I'm not doing anything permanent. I'm just doing this to show you. But we went and grabbed a rail here. I'll show you one of the things that you can do to fix a square corner. Now, this one is not going to work out quite the way I'd like because the two fences aren't even. One's quite a bit taller than the other. But fortunately, there's some rails that are pretty close, so get the idea here. Is you can just take a long board of some kind, another rail or whatever, and put it across like that. Now, you know, if you happen to have multiple levels that are the same height, you could put up a couple. Another option is planting a shrub. If you own your own property, plant a shrub in the corner, and once it fills out, you can take these boards down and use them for something else. You know, these, if it's your own property, you could nail them into place. If it's not your own property, but the property owner doesn't mind you making a few little changes, but don't want you nailing things, you can just tie them into place. You know, you can tie each end with a piece of rope. Now, on the note of ropes, that's another option you have, assuming that you don't have a bunch of wood laying around or don't want to go buy some. Something else that you can do. Just give me a second. Now, one of the other options that you have is rope. If you happen to have a fair length of rope, well, you can just take some rope, hook it onto whatever, tie it onto the top of the post, whatever's handy, run it across diagonally. Well, then we'll go back, hook it on again, run it back across. Now, obviously, rope isn't as strong as the wood would be, but you can still end up with I should have unraveled this a bit more before I started here, but get this out enough here to, you get the idea. Go back over here again, something like that, and you might want to do it out a little bit further, maybe to that post over there, the next one over, or something like that. But just anything to close off the area. So that's how you can fix square corners. It's one of the ways. You can either, like I said, put up some wood. If you don't have that temporary fix, just string up some rope if you got some rope laying around. If you happen to own the property, plant a shrub in the corner. That actually has a few other advantages, but just make sure it's in far enough that the horses can't get in behind it, and possibly have some rope or wood until the shrub grows up enough that it starts filling out that corner. Getting into plants and stuff here now. Now we'll talk about a few other things for making yourself a little bit of a space to work in too. Now, you're going to want, for working with your horse, you're going to want some kind of a contained space of some sort. And, well, what you're going to end up using might depend on what's available to you. And one of the things that you can do, and if you have, you know, like I said, what you're going to do is going to depend on whether or not you even own the property. But if you happen to own the property, well, that makes things a whole lot easier. You can start putting in some fence posts or whatever to can create, you know, take a little corner of your corral or pasture area that this is actually part of our outdoor riding arena here. And what you can do with it is, you know, make yourself a little contained space, like you, if you don't have a round pen. Now, round pens are typically 50 feet in diameter. What does that work out to? About 15 meters? Something a little over that. The one we got here is actually 55 feet. It doesn't have to be exact, but you don't really want it much smaller than that and not a whole lot larger than that, because that's just kind of a comfortable size. So even if you end up with a square to work in, something that is approximately 50 feet across will do the trick quite nicely. Most lunge lines are approximately, They might vary a little bit, but they're usually about 20. The one I had, I think it was 22 feet. I don't have it anymore. But, that gives you pretty much the same diameter circle for your horse as you would have in a round pen. Now, I find a line that long is too awkward to be using when training. I use something a little shorter, but just the same. About a 50-foot diameter space, or across it if it's a square, tends to work best. Now, you can take a corner. You've already got two sides here. You only have to make two more. If you happen to own the property, it's not a big deal to put in a couple more posts, run a couple of rails or whatever, and you got yourself a nice little contained corner to keep your horse in. It also helps keep other horses out if you have more than one horse. In this case of this place, we've got probably 30 horses out here. Having a little contained space to work in is pretty important. So something you can do is you can actually just section it off, even temporarily, using step-in posts or something like that. You can just string up some more of this wonderful rope that you got laying around, and sometimes you can buy a roll of the stuff pretty cheap if you catch it on sale. This stuff, I don't even know how much you paid for it, but again, we can just take this, tie it onto a post, string it across, step in a post, string it across, tie it on, done. And depending on the horses, that may be all it takes. If they're a little pushy, you might have to put in a couple extra posts, but maybe some electric tape instead of rope if you have some. Things like that, just don't back into it. I'm sure that wouldn't be fun. But I have one horse that I could probably string up just a piece of picture hanging wire, and she won't go near it. I think she's had some experience with electric fence in the past. Other horses, they'll get a little pushy. You got to put up something a little more substantial. You want to get real lazy? Just take your rope, run it straight across from one side to another. You got a triangle, not a square, but if you make it big enough, that'll still do the trick. So just a couple of little tips. I could probably tie the rope up here and show you, but I don't know if there's much point. I've kind of explained what you need to do. Just tie it onto the fence or put in a couple of posts, run some rails around, make yourself a little corner in your pasture somewhere. You can improvise, and like I said, depending on whether you own the property or not, and what your landowner is willing to allow you to do, will determine largely what you're going to end up doing in the end, as far as whether you're going to be putting in posts or just step in posts and some rope or whatever. You'll have to experiment a little. Like I said, depends on the other horses around too, because not only, if you got your horse on a lead to begin with, it doesn't have to be terribly secure as far as keeping your horse in. But you do want something that's going to be secure enough to keep the other horses out, because you don't want other horses in the same space as you when you're working with a horse, because you need to be focused on the horse you're working with. And if you're distracted by other horses, it can become a significant safety issue. So you do want some kind of a contained space to work in, which is one of the reasons I do like a round pen, not so much for the fact that it's a round pen, but simply the fact that it's a place you can go by yourself, you and the horse. You're segregated from the others. It's safer for you. It's less distraction for the horse, things like that. And I actually did a video a while ago on this one, back out here, and I was talking about how I like to work in different places with the horse too. And we will eventually be coming out here again. We've been out here before, but we found that because he was really, really green at the time, it was a little bit too much of a distraction for him, and it actually was just making things really difficult for me. So now that he's learned everything quite well inside the arena, we're going to, again, bring him outside and work in a few places outside on the nicer days when we can, just to get him used to some different places, different footing, different sights and sounds and things like that. And well, as you saw in the earlier part of this video, there was a bunch of little horses running around, youngsters over in the next pen. So that's a bit of a distraction. We're right next to a bit of a roadway through the yard here, stuff like that. People walking by, cars driving by, things like that. All kinds of distractions, great stuff, in my opinion. eventually. Initially, you might want to minimize your distractions, but after a while, like I said, variety is really good. Getting your horse used to a lot of different sights and sounds and places, because they're things that the horse is going to have to get used to eventually. So anyhow, a contained space. Fixing corners, that was one of the things I wanted to talk about, and contained space. You can, like I said, you can take a corner of your pasture, a corner of any area that is available, and turn it into an area that you can work in with a little bit of improvisation and ambition. And like I said, what you do, I'm just giving you a few suggestions. It all depends on whether or not you own the property, what you're allowed to do, and by all means, if it's not your property, get permission. Talk nice, and you'd be surprised that most people are going to be pretty reasonable and cooperative. And as long as you're not horribly destructive and saying that you're going to rip out a whole bunch of fencing on them or something, they probably aren't going to really care too much if you decide you're just going to cordon off a little corner somewhere, especially if they got a fairly large pasture. They aren't really going to mind losing a little 50-foot square in one corner. Not going to be a big problem. And, if you make one side easy to untie and tie back up again, you don't even have to put in a gate. But that's an option too. If you own the property, you want something a little more permanent, you can start putting in some posts and then put in a gate, all that stuff. But for relatively little work and little cost, you can effectively create, if you use your imagination a little, you can create a place that you can work with your horse. So if you don't have an indoor arena like I do, or a round pen, there's always options. There's always ways you can do things. The only thing is, when you're working, you want to have some place where you can contain your horse and keep the other horses out. Now, if your horse is on a lead, well, it's going to be fairly well contained most of the time anyhow, as long as you don't push it too hard where it freaks out, tries running away, and drags you along with it. Either that or you're going to have to let go of the lead, and depending on how big your pasture is, you may end up saying goodbye to the horse. In a case like this place, even if the horse did get out of this area, if I was to make a little corner here to work in, there is a larger area here. It's all fenced in anyhow. The horse isn't going to get very far, so I'm not going to have to walk for miles to get my horse back, fortunately. But just a few options. Use your imagination, a little creativity. A couple hunks of wood and some rope will fix a corner, put a shrub in if it's your own property. As far as contained space, ropes, boards, whatever you got handy. Doesn't have to be fancy, doesn't have to look pretty, it just has to be functional. Depending on how pushy the horses are, may have to be fairly solid. Maybe it won't have to be. All depends on the horses. So there you go, a few ideas that you can use, and have some fun with your horse.
Well, hope you enjoyed that one. That's a wrap for that subject for now. I might go into that one again in a bit, because where I am right now, I've got even fewer facilities, and it's always a challenge trying to keep me and my horse safe when we're working with them. We have different issues here where I am now, and we'll talk about some of them. A lot of it is actually pretty much the same, but we just have a few things that are a little different. But anyhow, I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope that it gave you some ideas, things you can do. I'm sure that if you think about it long enough, you might even come up with something I didn't even think about. And depending on your facilities and what you have available to work with, who knows, you might come up with something completely different than what you saw in that video. So use your imagination, get creative, use what's at your disposal, and have fun. Because I know if I can do it, so can you. Have a good day.